The author who is going to be here with us today, the main star of the evening, is perhaps one of the most controversial contemporary French writers. He has literally split the country in half. Some people find it hard to pronounce his name. Some people find it hard to digest his work. But he's a wonderful writer. Half of the French nation loves and adores his work. The other half perhaps doesn't like him, but I don't think he cares. Let us try to present some of his poetry. In fact, Josef Janek has translated one of his poems into Czech. I don't think any of his poetry has been published here in Czech, so I'm going to read the poem to you in Czech. The interpreters don't have the text of the poem, so we'll just have to let you enjoy it in Czech.
Bylo nám 17-18 let. Když na ně vzpomenu, vidím jejich lesknoucí se oči. A teď, když bych měl oslovit nějakou jinou bytost, nějakou jinou lidskou bytost, je to práce a trápení v nejsilnějším smyslu, který ta slova mívala v staré literatuře. Samota světla v úžlabí hory, zatímco mráz přituluje a skližuje víčka. Bude tomu tak až po den naší smrti? Zestárlé tělo netouží přece o nic méně uprostřed noci. Za noci osamělé tělo hladovějící po něze, tělo téměř rozdrcené cítí, že v něm zas ožívá drásavá mladost. Bez ohledu na fyzickou znavenost, na včerejší pochod, na labužnický oběd, na litry piva, tělo nabízené, hladovějící po laskání a po úsměvech, stále se zachvívá v vnitřním světle, v zázračném věčném světle jitra nad horami. Vzduch trochu ostřejší a vůně tymiánu, ty hory vybízejí ke štěstí. Pohled spočine, potom se snese dál. Snažím se zahnat strach. Vím, že všechno špatné pochází z já, ale já pochází zevnitř. Pod klempou čirého vzduchu je radost, ale pod kůží je strach. Uprostřed té krajiny, hor středně vysokých, zvolna si zase dodávám odvahy. Dospívám k otevření srdce, mé ruce už nejsou sputané, cítím se připraven ke štěstí. Jasně modré nebe po lehůnku přichází v temnou modř a tvoje oči jsou pořád zelené. Tvoje oči jsou zrcadlem světa. Říkám to znova, některé chvíle jsou dokonalé. Není to jenom tím, že zmizí všechna hrubost světa. Nejen tichým srozuměním v tak prostých úkonech lásky, poklízení a dětského koupání. Je to i vědomím, že srozumění by mohlo trvat. Že nic vážně nestojí v cestě tomu, aby trvalo. Je to vědomím, že se narodil nový organismus, ladných a vymezených pohybů, nový organismus, ve kterém můžeme už teď žít. Vrací se noc, odchod slunce nad obligátními piniemi a tvoje oči jsou pořád stejné. Den je ustálený a plný. Tak, teď bych...
Okay. May I invite the author of this poem up on stage? Unfortunately, I don't speak French. Perhaps lucky you. So he's going to be here on his own. He'll be all yours. And perhaps if you feel like asking some questions, we'll see how things go. At any rate, give it up for Mr. Michel Houellebecq.
Oui. En fait, c'est en prenant l'avion que je me suis aperçu que je venais.
Well, when I got on the plane, I realized that I'm traveling to a festival devoted to Casanova, and I found it slightly shocking. Well, I guess for you, or for Czechs, it has many connotations. It evokes a lot. Casanova was a famous seducer, and his name has actually become a term in everyday language. And perhaps there's a slight dissonance because the heroes of my novels are not Casanovas. The first one hasn't had sex for years and is depressed about it and keeps trying and trying and is depressed about failing, while the other, Raphael Disron, is trying to seduce any woman he comes in contact with, but he's ugly, he has no charm, and no success. He's never actually seduced a woman. So I guess if those people thought of someone like Casanova, they would have been terribly jealous. They would hate him, perhaps they would even think of killing him, murdering him. Anyway, it is difficult to imagine that a piece of literature could have been written that is so unlike Casanova. So what I thought was that perhaps I was going to read something else to you, something that has a sexual charge, because I do have that in my books, and often I'm actually criticized for it. But then I realized that the Extension du Domaine de la Lutte is the only book that I had written that has been translated into Czech. I mean, I followed the translation process from afar, and I don't always remember what translated into. So I figured I should actually read from this book. But anyway, this book is not really in line with Casanova. So anyway, here it goes. Back to the cows. At 5:52, on a bitterly cold morning, the train made its way into La Rozšíření. The town was silent, peaceful, absolutely peaceful. Right then, I say to myself, now's the time for a little walk in the countryside. I passed through the deserted, or practically deserted, streets of the suburbs. At first, I tried comparing the characteristics of the semis, but it was really difficult. The sun not having come up yet, I quickly gave it up. A few of the inhabitants were already up and about, despite the early hour. They watched me go by from the garages. They seemed to be asking themselves what I was doing there. If they had questioned me, I would have had been hard-pressed to give them an answer. In fact, nothing justified my presence here, neither here nor anywhere else, to tell the truth. Then I arrived in the countryside proper. There were fences, and behind the fences, cows. A slight blueness announced the approach of dawn. I looked at the cows. Most of them weren't asleep. They had already started grazing. I remarked to myself that they were right. They must have been cold. May as well take a little exercise. I observed them benevolently, without in the least intending to disturb their early morning peace and quiet. Some of them came over to the fence without mooing and looked at me. They were leaving me in peace too. That was fine. Later, I took myself off to the departmental headquarters of agriculture. Tisserand was already there. He shook my hand with surprising warmth. The director was waiting for us in his office. He turned out right away to be a rather likable guy. Obviously a kind of a simple soul. On the other hand, he was totally impervious to the technological message we were supposed to bring him. Computers, he tells us bluntly, he wants nothing to do with them. He has no wish to change his work habits just for the sake of being modern. Things are going nicely the way they are, and they'll go on doing so at least as long as he is there. If he's agreed to our coming, it's only for not having hassles with the ministry, but the moment we're gone, he'll put the software in a cupboard and not touch it again. In these circumstances, the training sessions appeared to be an amiable pleasantry, a way of chatting to pass the time. That didn't bother me in the least.
I realize that this run is gradually losing it. After Christmas, he leaves to go skiing with an under-25s club, the no boring old fans kind, with evenings in the disco and breakfasting late. In short, the kind where you do a lot of fucking, but he evokes the prospect without enthusiasm. I get the feeling he doesn't believe it for a minute. From time to time, his bespectacled gaze drifts aimlessly over me. He gives the impression of being bewitched. I know how it feels. I experienced the same thing 2 years ago after my separation from Veronique. You get the feeling you can roll about on the ground, slash your veins with a razor blade or masturbate in the metro, and nobody will pay any attention, nobody will lift a finger, as if you were protected from the world by a transparent film, inviolable and perfect. Anyway, Tisserand said it to me the other day. He'd been drinking. I feel like a shrink-wrapped chicken leg on a supermarket shelf. He also came out with, I feel like a frog in the formaldehyde. Besides, I resemble a frog, don't I? I gently replied, Raphael, in a reproachful tone. He started, It's the first time I've called him by his Christian name. He was flustered and didn't say a word. The next morning at breakfast, he started long and hard at his bowl of Nesquik. And then, in an almost dreamy voice, he sighed, Fuck it, I'm 28 and still a virgin. I was astonished, even so. He then explained that a vestige of pride has always stopped him from going with whores. I upbraided him for this, a bit too strongly perhaps, since he persisted in explaining his point of view to me again that very evening, just before leaving to Paris for the weekend. We were in the parking lot of the departmental head office for agriculture. The street lamps were exuding an extremely unpleasant yellowish light. The air was cold and damp. He said, I've done my sums, you see. I've enough to pay for 1 whore a week. Saturday evening, that would be good. Maybe I'll end up doing it, but I know that some men can get the same thing for free, and would love to boot. I prefer trying. For the moment, I still prefer trying. Obviously, I couldn't come up with anything to say, but I returned to my hotel deep in thought. It's a fact, I mused to myself, that in societies like ours, sex truly represent a second system of differentiation, completely independent from money. And as a system of differentiation, it functions just as mercilessly. The effects of these two systems are, furthermore, strictly equivalent. Just like unrestrained economic liberalism, and for similar reasons, sexual liberalism produces phenomena of absolute pauperization. Some men make love every day, others 5 or 6 times in their life, or never. Some make love with dozens of women, others with none. It's what's known as the law of the market. In an economic system where unfair dismissal is prohibited, every person more or less manages to find their place. In a sexual system where adultery is prohibited, every person more or less manages to find their bedmate. In a totally liberal economic system, certain people accumulate considerable fortunes, others stagnate in unemployment and misery. In a totally liberal sexual system, certain people have a varied and exciting erotic life. Others are reduced to masturbation and solitude. Economic liberalism is an extension of the domain of the struggle. Its extension to all ages and all classes of society. Sexual liberalism is likewise an extension of the domain of the struggle. Its extension to all ages and all classes of society. On the economic plane, Raphael Tisserand belongs to the victor's camp. On sexual plane, in that of the vanquished. Certain people win on both levels, others lose on both. Businesses fight over certain young professionals. Women fight over certain young men. Men fight over certain young women. The trouble and strife are considerable. After I came out of my hotel with one clear intention of getting pissed, I found a cafe open opposite the station. A few teenagers were playing pinball, and that was about it. After the third cognac, my thoughts turned to Gérard Levrier. Gérard Levrier was an administrator in the Assemblée Nationale in the same department as Véronique, who was working there as a secretary. Gérard was 26 and earned 30,000 francs a month. However, Gérard was shy and prone to depression. One Friday evening in December, he didn't have to go back on the Monday. Somewhat against his better judgment, he'd taken a fortnight off for the holidays. Gérard went back home and put a bullet in his brain. The news of his death didn't really surprise anyone in the National Assembly. He was mainly known there for the problems he was encountering in buying himself a bed. He decided on the purchase months before, but the realization of his project was proving impossible. The tale was usually told with a faint, ironic smile, yet there was nothing to laugh about. These days the purchase of a bed does present enormous difficulties, enough to drive you to suicide. To begin with, delivery has to be arranged, and then usually half a day taken off work with all the problems that it entails. Sometimes delivery men don't come, or maybe they don't manage to get the bed up the stairs, so you are obliged to ask for another half day off. These problems recur for all furniture and domestic appliances, and the accumulation of difficulties resulting from this can already be enough to seriously unhinge a sensitive person. Of all your furniture, the bed base is a particular, eminently distressing problem. If you want to retain the goodwill of the salesman, you're obliged to buy a double bed, whether you need one or not, whether you have the room for it or not. To buy a single bed is to publicly admit you don't have a sex life, and that you don't envisage having one in the near or even distant future. Best last a long time these days, way beyond the guarantee date. It's a matter of 5, 10 or even 20 years. This is a serious investment which commits you in practical terms for the rest of your days. Beds last on an average much longer than marriages, as is well known. Even the purchase of a 140-centimeter bed makes you pass for a stingy and narrow petit bourgeois. In the salesman's eyes, the 160-centimeter bed is the only one really worth buying, in which case you have a right to their respect, to their consideration, even to a slight knowing smile. And they only grant for the 160-centimeter bed. On the evening of Gérard's death, his father phoned up his work. Since he was out of the office, it was Véronique who took the call. The message was simply to phone his father urgently. She forgot to pass it on. So Gérard got back home at 6 without knowing about the message and put a bullet in his brain. Véronique told me this evening of the day they learned about his death at the National Assembly. She added that it scared the shit out of her. Those were her exact words. I imagined she was going to feel some sort of guilt, remorse. Not at all. She'd already forgotten by the next morning. Veronique was in analysis, as they say. Today, I regret I met her. I had an opportunity to say that a woman who is undergoing analysis cannot be of any use. This is perhaps not the main principle of analysis, but just the main aim. Psychoanalysts often do scandalous damage to human personality because all is in their hands, all is destroyed in their hands. They're generously paid, big-headed, and well-paid, and sometimes they extinguish any capability of love, even the bodily love. They behave as the enemies of humankind. It is a school of egoism which often serves young women to make them into egocentric cows, which can indeed generate nothing but resistance. A person who's undergone psychoanalysis cannot be believed. Egoism, arrogant ignorance, and the absence of a sense of morality, the inability to love. That's the full portrait of a woman under analysis.